The actions of a US Marine while stationed on the island of Okinawa would infuriate Japanese locals and foreigners alike. And as this crime unfolded beneath their feet, the island would once again question its current affairs with the military of the United States. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. My name is Adrian, and in today's video we're looking at the seldom known case of Rina Shimabukuro. In April of 2016, Rina walked out the front door of her apartment, never to be seen again. But were the events which followed accidental, or was something more sinister at play? Today's video investigates these questions. But before diving into our case, I wanted to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. When I started this channel over 17 months ago, I had no idea how to edit videos. That's when I turned to Skillshare to brush up on these skills. And as you can probably imagine, I've had no regrets. You've very likely heard of Skillshare before. It's a community with thousands of creative classes for anyone who loves to try or learn something new. As an example, Jordan Vanderput's classes on video editing with Premiere Pro really helped me gain a fundamental understanding on basic editing, visual effects, and general audio mixing. Taking classes like these really helped boost my video editing knowledge so I could provide better quality content for you sooner. So what skill will you learn in 2022? Maybe it's video editing, or photography, illustration, or even learning how to be more productive. Skillshare is full to the brim of professional and enticing classes. And better yet, the first 1,000 viewers to use the code Coffeehouse Crime or use the link in the video description will get 1 month's free trial from Skillshare, so you can start exploring your creativity today. That's the code Coffeehouse Crime, or alternatively, use the link in the video description below. And thank you Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. And so, with that said, pull up a seat, grab a coffee, and sit back. This is the case of Rina Shimabukuro. You all know my affinity with Japan by now, and today we're once again travelling to Nihon. However, this time we're heading over to the very southwest of the country to an area we have yet to visit. Welcome to the southern islands of Okinawa. Now, I've always said that Japan as a country is extremely diverse when it comes to climate. And perhaps not many of you know this, but northern Japan actually has the highest snowfall per year when compared to any other country. Today's video looks at the stark opposite of this, as Okinawa is Japan's version of tropical paradise. It's a popular destination for Japanese natives looking to catch some sun, waves, and warmth. And sandy beaches and a laid-back atmosphere to the island is what makes Okinawa special. Okinawa is classed as its own prefecture, but has a relatively small population. It's also a destination that has a heavy Western influence, from its beach culture to its local delicacies. And strangely, spam is a very common food to be found in Okinawan cuisine, even in sushi. There's great reason for Western influence in Okinawa, as 25% of the island is actually covered by military bases from the United States. It's no secret that the local people of Okinawa are uneasy with this arrangement, as 60% of their small 460 square meter island is consumed by its military presence. This has been a point of contention between the US and Japan since World War II. But otherwise, Okinawa is a laid-back island with a vibrant culture and wonderful people. And it's here, on this island in Uruma City, that we find 20-year-old Rina Shimabukuro. Rina lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment. She was a hard-working employee in a corporate office, which at her age was rather admirable. For the most part, she was independent, and she was a very self-driven young woman. She was admired in the workplace and by those around her for a positive yet sensible attitude towards life. Rina grew up as an only child, mostly keeping to herself, but liked by those around her for a polite personality. She was also known to break out some impressive dancing and singing skills when around those she was most comfortable with. While growing up, Rina always desired to have siblings to share her passions with. And so, as she became older, one of Rina's main ambitions was to have children, telling her friends that she was aiming to have around 6 of them. And this opportunity may have come sooner than expected, as in 2015, Rina began a relationship with a local Okinawan man. Due to the nature of Japanese media and identity protection, we don't know the name of this man, so for the sake of this story, we will call him Hinata. What we do know about Hinata is he was an attentive and respectful partner, and he treated Rina well. We know this as Rina's new boyfriend quickly gained her parents' approval, something which often makes or breaks a relationship in Japan. Things were going so well between the two that eventually they moved in together, getting an apartment in Uruma City, and settling into their everyday lives, they slipped into a routine. Rina and Hinata would work on the weekdays to cherish their moments together on the weekends. In the following months, the couple described their relationship as happy and content, and this routine would carry them for several months more. until all of a sudden, tragedy would blindside their peace in April of 2016. On a mild spring evening, Rina decided to head out for a walk. It had been a long day sitting in the office, and so she figured she would go out to stretch her legs. At around 8 PM that evening, just before dusk, she slipped into her red sneakers and a black parka before shutting the door behind her. Rina kept in regular contact with her boyfriend through the messaging app Line, which is the most popular way to talk by text in Japan, much akin to WhatsApp in the West. She messaged her boyfriend to say that she was going out for a walk and would be back later on in the evening, which was nothing out of the ordinary. Taking her usual route along the edge of a canal, she took in the evening's calming sights. Reflections in the water displaying illuminations of apartment buildings, commercial stores, restaurants, and even a mega Don Quixote. On the other side of this canal was an industrial sector full of factories, warehouses, and shipping companies, all of which were busily working their way into the night. Rina had walked here many times after work. She felt safe here, and rightfully so. And this very night, Hinata was waiting back at home for her to return. But as the hours passed by and the clock hit midnight, the incessant feeling of worry began to haunt the young man's mind. Rina did like her own space, so at 2 AM he sent her a single text message to say he was signing off for the night, which after a few minutes was marked as read. Surely this meant she was okay. Maybe she had bumped into a friend and wanted some time to catch up. After all, in Japan, it's very common for couples to keep their feelings to themselves. And so Hinata went to bed, expecting to see or hear from Rina in the morning. Maybe then they could catch up and talk about where she had been over the evening. But as the morning arrived, there was still no sign of Rina anywhere. She hadn't returned home or replied to his message, despite this message being marked as read. This didn't sit right with Hinata, and so, on the morning of April the 29th, he contacted local police to report his girlfriend, Rina Shimabukuro, as missing. Police were rather quick to arrive at the residence, and while there they began their investigations, asking Rina's boyfriend as much information as they could. In parallel to this, Rina's group of friends immediately took to social media, asking around for their missing friend, and soon enough, speculation started to spread like wildfire around the tight-knit community. As time clambered by, multiple theories arose. Some believed it was a random abduction, some believed the boyfriend had something to do with it, while others speculated cult activity. And as all this heresy plagued Rina's disappearance, the police released multiple images to the public in hopes that someone would come forward with a lead. However, as these first few days passed by without any notion or clue, concern and dread began to fill the hearts and minds of Rina's family, friends, and boyfriend. During public campaigning, police were still working hard behind the scenes. Eventually, they discovered where Rina's cell phone had last pinged in the moment she read her boyfriend's final text message for the night, which just so happened to be in the early morning hours of 2 AM. It turns out that her cell phone had pinged one final time while inside the industrial estate located next to the canal. This was a critical piece of information for officers, as now they could question those working around the site and start to scour the area for any clues or evidence. It was through these efforts that they spotted something peculiar on a surveillance camera, which happened to be owned by one of the industrial companies. On the very same night Rina disappeared, a red SUV seemed to be acting rather strangely. And upon further investigation, they discovered that the SUV belonged to a US military serviceman stationed in Okinawa, and more specifically, at the Kadena Air Base. The car was owned by a man named Kenneth Shinzato, and he was a 32-year-old US Marine stationed on the island. Back at home, Kenneth was born and raised in New York by a single mother, Shirley Gadson, and although Shirley did her best to raise him, she was ultimately ill-equipped to care for the young boy. Kenneth was a problem child while growing up. He was disruptive at school, had regular temper tantrums, and often fought against his mother. In fact, this behaviour got so bad that Shirley ended up taking Kenneth to therapy. Paperwork from the Upper Manhattan Mental Health Center described Shirley as cognitively limited, and declared that the two had a tangled and enmeshed relationship which made his treatment extremely difficult. Ultimately, Kenneth was put into foster care in 1997 at the young age of 11, and from here he went through a total of 5 foster families due to his behaviour. At the age of 18, Kenneth moved into his own place near his mother's home until eventually he joined the Marines. He served in the Marines for 7 begrudging years, before taking a back seat in 2014 by accepting support work for the Marines in Japan instead of moving back to the US. And the reason for this was very understandable. Meeting and falling in love with a Japanese woman, the two eventually married, and Kenneth had even taken her last name to distance himself from his own mother. The two would also have a newborn son in March of 2016. And although his wife had urged him to tell his mother, this never actually occurred. Which brings us to May of 2016, only 2 months since the birth of his own son. This was when Kenneth's car was spotted on cameras around the same area and time where Rina disappeared. So why was he here? Did he have anything to do with it? And what was the reasoning for his suspicious behaviour? Kenneth immediately piqued their curiosity, but when he came in for questioning on May the 16th, he denied any involvement, and he answered all questions to an acceptable standard. However, they did seize Kenneth's car in an effort to conduct their own forensic analysis, but the results for this would take several days to come back. And so, with that said, Kenneth was released from police custody, as there was no evidence to suggest he was involved in Rina's disappearance. You'd expect that, under normal circumstances, he would return home to his family, but that is not what Kenneth had in mind. Instead, he made his way to a local drugstore, purchased an extortionate amount of sleeping pills, and purchased a 2-litre bottle of whiskey, and you can probably guess what his plans were. The next morning, Kenneth attempted to take his own life, but after ultimately failing, he was admitted to his local hospital. Unfortunately, it gets worse, as the very next day after being released, he was once again rushed to hospital after downing 2 more bottles of whiskey in one evening. This behaviour is reactionary to his situation. Whether it was from guilt or fear, Kenneth wanted out of whatever scenario he was slowly falling into, and this was by any means necessary. Just 1 day after Kenneth's second overdose on alcohol, results from the tests conducted on his vehicle had finally come back. DNA found inside his car had been compared to DNA found in Rina's home. And unfortunate for him, the tests were conclusive. A match was found. This at least confirms to investigators that Rina Shimabukuro had at some point been inside Kenneth's vehicle, and most likely on the very night she had disappeared. This undeniable proof seemed to overburden him, because as soon as interrogations began, Kenneth finally buckled. He admitted his part in Rina's disappearance, and even worse, he told officers where they could find her. Leading investigators to a small and sad wooded area in Honor Village, officers came to a black suitcase. Like a meaningless object, it had been thrown off the side of a road, discarded into the woodland underbrush, and inside lay the decaying body of a young woman. Being here for more than 20 days in the searing Okinawan heat, she was unrecognisable and partially skeletonized. DNA testing later confirmed her identity, and tragically, it was the body of Rina Shimabukuro. The community at large were devastated. As we can all imagine, they had hoped to find Rina alive and well. But sadly, these hopes were now crushed. With the discovery of Rina's body, Kenneth felt no reason to withhold information from authorities for any longer, and instead, he gave his version of the events which unfolded on the 28th of April 2016. It was on this evening, when Kenneth was driving around Uruma, that he spotted a small 5-foot frame walking alone in the dusky hours. You see, Kenneth claims that he'd always fantasized about dark things, even as early as childhood. Rather disgustingly, he fantasized about forcing himself onto women, murdering them, and even taking his own life. And to take things one step further, he also fantasized about killing his mother and even causing mass tragedy. In fact, his reasoning for joining the military was out of the expectation that he could kill other people. Abducting and restraining women before carrying out his desires was a long-running fantasy of his. And on the night that he saw Rina, the situation was perfect. She was small, alone, in a quiet area, and had the means of kidnap at his disposal. Almost as if it was planned, or in Kenneth's eyes, fate. Kenneth pulled up on the nearby road and pursued the woman on foot, before coming up behind her and striking her over the head with a metal rod. Kenneth grabbed her, dragged her to a nearby area, and then assaulted her. But Rina was not fully unconscious. She began to resist Kenneth, fight back, and even call for help. This was when Kenneth pulled his arm back and began to physically fight the defenseless woman. And after pulling out his knife, he stabbed her multiple times, until eventually, Rina was no more. Kenneth retreated to his car, pulled out a black suitcase, loaded his victim inside the suitcase, placed it into the back of his SUV, and drove off into the night. And after driving 20 kilometers or 12 miles from Uruma to Oma village, he stopped on the side of a quiet road, throwing the suitcase as far as he could into the underbrush. This is where Rina would stay for 22 long days. Acting as if nothing had happened, Kenneth then retreated back to his car and drove back home to his wife and newly born son. In the following days, Kenneth was waiting for expectation for police to come knocking at his door. But as the days and then weeks passed, his confidence grew. He resumed his normal life, starting to believe that he may have gotten away with his crime. However, as we all know, this was not the case, and soon after, he was to face the full force of the law. Rina's murder brought a lot of attention towards US military presence on the island, and as the years go by, there's a notably growing amount of crimes that are being committed by US personnel. This contention began in 1995 when 3 US Marines kidnapped and sexually assaulted a 12-year-old girl, and since then, Okinawa has debated hosting the US military. The murder of Rina Shimabukuro wasn't only a fresh reminder to this notion, it was a very strong one at that, and Kenneth's actions actually brought thousands of residents out to the streets in protest.
This is not how we want the country to be. We are your friends, your neighbors, but we want base to be gone.
Before court, Kenneth insisted he did not intend to kill Rina, and apparently his only aim was assault. Throughout his trial, Kenneth was reserved, quiet, and often staring into space. Both judge and jury did not buy his story, and instead they determined that all of it was premeditated. It was noted that Kenneth had brought his own murder kit out with him late at night, including a baton, an empty suitcase, and a knife. And if his aim was only to assault, then why were these items in his car? His actions on this night did not reflect those of someone who did not have intention to kill. While being charged with murder, sexual assault, and illegal disposal of a body, Kenneth would plead guilty to sexual assault resulting in death and abandoning a body, but denied his charge of murder. And with Rina's parents calling for the death penalty, Kenneth had every reason to worry. Fortunate for him, but this sentence would never come his way, and instead, Judge Toshihiro Shibata would give him life in prison, stating there was no room for leniency in such a violent and unnecessary crime. Nobody can deny that Kenneth's actions that night were selfish and despicable, and his evil actions cannot be defended. Perhaps his resentment towards women can be spurred from an internal hate towards his mother. Then again, his wife never complained of any ill behaviour towards her, and neighbours always said that the couple were kind and happy. So, what made Rina different from any other woman in his life? And what led him to choose her on that lonely, fateful night? Unfortunately, we will never quite know. Rina was a young woman who had just entered her true adulthood. She was planning her future, her marriage, and her family. She was kind, patient, and loving towards those around her, and especially towards her boyfriend, who misses her dearly. Rina was positive, sensible, polite, and nurturing. Characteristics which you could argue are the total opposite to a killer. And tragically, her dreams were stripped away from her by a disturbed stranger. She wasn't given a chance, all by the actions of one individual. Thank you so much for tuning in to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this case interesting or insightful, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. We have one more case coming from Japan in about a week's time, as there are so many interesting cases to cover. But what are your thoughts on me covering more Japanese true crime? Please let me know in the comment section down below. Once again, I wanted to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Skillshare can be monumental in self-development, so why not give it a try? I'll leave a link in the video description down below. I'll be back again next week with 2 brand new videos, so as always, I'll be seeing you again real soon. But until that moment arrives, look after each other. Goodbye.